All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for joining today's webinar, Unlocking the Power of Data Governance. I am Ashley Howell, and I'm pleased to be the moderator on today's webcast. Just a couple logistical things before I introduce you to today's speakers. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we will share out the recording with you within the next day or two as soon as it's made available to us. And we encourage you to share that presentation broadly. We also will be taking Q&A throughout the presentation. So at any point that you've got a question, please just pop that into the Q&A chat box and we'll try to get to your question. And we've also reserved some time at the end as well. If we don't get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you one-on-one. So with further ado, I'd love to introduce you to today's speakers. We're super excited to have Paul Rankin here with us. He's a senior data architect, BI analytics solutions specialist, and has 15 years designing and delivering data integrations and BI solutions for large national and international organizations. And he was previously the head of data management platforms with Roche in diagnostics. Thanks so much, Paul, for being here today.
Great to be here, Ashley. Thank you.
We also have Mike Migalski. He's the founder and principal architect at infoVia, and he draws from a quarter century of software data and security experience at global leaders in healthcare, manufacturing, insurance, education, and service industries. Mike, thanks so much for joining us to share your insights today.
Good deal.
Last but not least, we've got Mike Kalusik. He's infoVia's Chief Operating Officer responsible for all aspects of the company's performance, and he previously worked for leading technology organizations for several Fortune 100 firms, such as Fidelity National Financial and United Health Group. Mike, thanks so much for being on today's call.
Oh yeah, glad to be here.
So Mike, without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to you to jump into the conversation.
Sure, great. Thank you, Ashley. I want to kick off our conversation because so many people have varying views on what data governance is today. And some people take a huge monolithic approach, and other people take more of a surgical approach to bringing data governance into their organization. And so, Paul, I want to ask you, from your vantage point, what do you see as sort of the common understanding of data governance today? And what do you see as problems with that understanding of what it is?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll start with straight in there with the tough questions. So, I mean, clearly, and when I'm out working with a number of organizations today, governance can mean, essentially rule with authority, control. Yeah, this kind of real heavy-handed, control about managing control. Now, it can mean this to a lot of people in a lot of organizations. I still see this very much. But if you kind of trace the word governance kind of back to the early days, I think, if I remember correctly, it comes from a Greek verb called, I think it was kubernean, I think it's called. And that's kind of to guide or to steer. Essentially, it was relating to the shipping industry in these days, in the early days. So, to me, it can mean anything in between those two, anywhere between this guiding, steering type of analogy to this, rule with authority and control. And unfortunately, in IT, right, we've kind of moved to this essentially this extreme of really governing with authority and control. Now, what I see nowadays is certainly IT think they're governing with authority and control, and they put those processes and those heavy-handed controls in, but actually in reality they're not. And this is the big problem: is the whole word governance is kind of, people are actually now a little, it has connotations of slow, of bad, of red tape, of heavy-handedness, and actually we need to really move away from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, what's your perspective on what you're seeing out there in terms of how people view data governance today?
Well, Paul, Paul's description there kind of reminds me of the pendulum swinging, and we see this a lot in technologies where it goes all the way from command and control all the way to to disseminate it and letting the business take care of it themselves. And the reality is that somewhere in the middle, when that pendulum comes more to a balance, is where it should be. And we've seen the data mesh craze start to become more prominent, and that I see that as the pendulum moving back toward the business owning and managing their data governance. And I think that the business should be involved in it, but I think we need centralization of the standards. And so we see that pendulum move from control to chaos, and it probably needs to fall back in the center. And I think Paul's smiling because he has some good anecdotes around that.
Yeah, I'm just laughing. Actually, I mean, as many of you know, that I spent 3.5 years at Roche, partly as a consultant and then as a full-time employee there. And yeah, 4 years ago, pretty much this time, myself and my good friend, my ex-boss Omar Kavaja, we introduced, along with ThoughtWorks, with the help of Zhamak and the ThoughtWorks team. It was about 4 years ago. We started to introduce, or we tried to implement data mesh of what we thought it might be, or it could be, in some of the problems that we thought it might solve. And actually, at that time, no one really knew what it was really. I mean, they kind of had a good idea, and it made a lot of sense, certainly to us when we were at Roche. But especially the governance part, the computational governance, the federated computational governance part, nobody really understood what that meant at the time. And yes, computational was just anything you can do with a computer, clearly. And what happened at Roche, and this is why I was smiling, was we went probably too far on the federated side and didn't have enough computational part there. Certainly, it grew and grew as we went along, but we've started, moving pretty much from a centralized monolith. It went kind of from this monolithic approach away down to this totally federated approach with not too much computation in it right at the start. And it was when you federate, right, and you go to a federated architecture model, you need to federate trust a little bit, and you need to hope that the business, or you need to make sure that the business, and not hope, has essentially the knowledge and the skills to enjoy this, let's say, this federated governance. And what we found at Roche at that time was that actually the business did not have the skills or the understanding of what real governance was, and it did become a little bit chaos. And because of that, I mean, everybody was absolutely thrilled at the time that they could govern their own data pipelines, they could govern their own data, their own controls, their own security to an extent. But this is all well and good, but if you don't have that level of maturity, in the teams, in the data product teams, then data quality suffers. Good data management practices do suffer a little bit, and then you need to start bringing it back a little bit, just as you said. So this was the pendulum at Roche. It really was, going from a centralized governing approach to, well, hey, everybody, it's federated time now. You're in control of your own governance, and then we had to bring it back a little bit, and find that middle ground. Mm-hmm. So just exactly what you were talking about.
Not that it's all about the tool, but you certainly can't have one business area managing their products with, Jira, and another managing theirs with, SharePoint, and then another managing theirs with Excel. That doesn't work very well to align. And then you have all your standards and how you're going to produce the deliverable for your product. You have to have some standards around that, or they're not interoperable. So certainly some central governance around your governance. It's like your governance needs governance.
Well, exactly right. I mean, for me, the governance, is actually built into things like data products. They're built in to a unified central self-service data platform. Yeah. And just by using you know, the data platform with all of its capabilities, its built-in security, you know, by actually delivering data products with, you know, certain characteristics and certain levels that it has to meet, that is governance, right? And you know, you go one step further and you make everything, you know, computational, or as much as you can, so that actually, you know, the data product teams don't actually need to know, you know, about governance. Yeah, maybe they need to be aware of it, but a lot of that stuff now they enjoy, and you're not telling them that they're being governed. They're enjoying the speed, they're enjoying the agility, they're enjoying publishing data products, they're enjoying finding data products, but you know, you're actually not saying this is governance. It's basically governance without even knowing it.
Paul, you bring up a good point about self-service analytics. And I remember going to the Gartner conference a couple of years ago, and there had to have been at least 24 products at the conference for self-service analytics. Everybody wants to get there. Everybody wants to empower the business, the sort of the lay people in the organization to ask questions of the data without needing to involve IT. But it seems to remain out of reach. And we all talk about, you know, publishing data catalogs and data dictionaries and things like that. But it seems like that's not closing the gap. What do you think is preventing sort of that utopia of self-service analytics among the non-technical folks?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Essentially, you know, self-service analytics was basically vendors saying, "Here you go, guys. Here's a tool. You know, go and knock yourself out." And it's a bit like someone. I read something the other day that self-service means it's essentially, you know, work it out yourself, right? You give them a tool and they work it out themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought this was quite good analogy, because you know, yes, you give someone a tool, you know, such as, you know, take, I don't know, Power BI, for example. That is a tool that has a lot of power by the name. You know, you connect it to a data source. I mean, there's an organization I'm working with just now that actually they connect it straight to BW. Yep, and they're doing everything. They're doing all their data modeling. They're doing the reporting, everything. You know, in Power BI, and essentially this for them is this self-service analytics. And yes, you know, it is in a way, but for me, there is no governance there, as you know, as you rightly point out, with a tool like this. You know, I mean, basically every developer's developing their own way, however they want, good or bad. There is no standardization. There is nobody, you know, really, you know, I suppose, checking for any potential, you know, data classification breaches or security breaches or anything like that. So, you know, I think this world of self-service analytics is kind of moved, for me, it's kind of moved into the citizen developer world now. Yep. Whereas, you know, the citizen developer is the new kind of self-service analytics. And, you know, to me, that could be even worse. You know, you give them a Git repository, a runner, and it's essentially they're off on their own, you know. But what we need to get to is a way that these citizen developers, I mean, we want to empower the developers in the organization. We don't expect all developers to be in IT anymore these days, you know. And this is where we want them to use a unified self-service platform, if you like, so that they can use the components, the technology that we've invested in. You know, we invest in certain technologies for a reason in companies. We want to protect our investment. We want to make sure that our people are skilled up on the right technologies, and it's not just a complete free-for-all. So, you know, that's where I think citizen development needs to move to, is, you know, they're building in a standard way on a standard data platform, you know, using the standard technologies and integrations chosen by the company, so that essentially they're focusing on business and business value, instead of what I see in most companies is these citizen developers are essentially focusing on building solutions, data platforms, integrations, rather than the business value.
Right. And it sounds like what you're describing is shadow IT. When that starts popping up all over an organization, then just chaos ensues from there, because now you have all kinds of solutions in place that don't integrate. And all of a sudden now you have this house of cards that you're trying to prop up on a daily basis. So definitely a valid point there.
We had a client that had 2,500 Power BI reports. You know, certainly report sprawl has encumbered them. You mentioned Power BI, so I'll bring it up. I don't think the tool, you can't necessarily blame the tool because it's powerful, like you said. But the right amount of standards and consistency, and then centralized management of those products where a given domain has responsibility for the objects within a shared data model. I think that can be implemented very well with Power BI, and we've helped organizations do something similar to that. Move your security out of your reporting platform and back a layer into your model, into your data layer, for example.
Absolutely.
So how do you determine the right amount of control in something that you know, and especially in today where the data mesh is pushing towards more democratization? What's the right amount of control there? How do we know when that pendulum is reaching its equilibrium?
We had a good question come in, you guys. Sorry to interrupt, but how can data governance help you get your data ready for AI initiatives?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I'll take a first stab at it, and I'd like to hear from you as well, Paul and Mike. But you know, the big thing with AI is only as intelligent as what it can get out of your data. And unless your data is well organized, well structured, you're really going to struggle to get good actionable information out of that data. So the first step, if you're going to go down the AI route, which everybody is these days, you have to make sure that your data platform is well architected, it's nimble, it can continue to evolve as your business evolves, and you have to ensure that it's well structured so that when you submit a question to your data, you're going to get back an answer that is able to really look across all of your data longitudinally and come to the conclusions that you're hoping it'll come to, so that it doesn't start giving you erroneous information that you feel is, you know, everybody thinks artificial intelligence is perfect and it's always right, and that's just not the case. And we've all seen that with hallucinations in ChatGPT and other platforms. So you have to be careful, and you have to start with a solid foundation. Paul and Mike, what would you guys add to that?
Mike, can you go first?
Sure. Well, the garbage in, garbage out applies. I feel like we've said that till we're blue in the face. Managing data products so that your AI solutions can consume curated, cleansed, clean, you know, curated data sets is certainly a step in that direction. You don't want your crown jewels to be put out there for the whole organization to consume, let alone the whole world to consume. So there has to be some access control around the solution, and we believe strongly that access control can be managed at the cell layer for the user within the context of who's asking. So by modeling data into objects that then can be managed for who can see which rows and columns within those objects, not to get too technical, but essentially putting cell level security around the objects that are being consumed by the AI agents is a huge step in the right direction, because now not only have you put restrictions around who can see what, but you've essentially built a platform that can be safely consumed by anyone, even outside your organization. So the ability to share data externally is achievable. And Gartner came out with a report that's probably been a year ago now, where they said organizations who share data outside of their walls are 3 times more profitable than those who don't. And however you measure profits, it may not be in dollars if you're a nonprofit organization, for example, but however you measure success, if you can be 3 times more successful by sharing data outside your walls, then we should be looking for ways to share our data widely while still protecting it from threats and breaches.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's I was laughing because when you mentioned the crown jewels don't want to be exposed. That has a different connotation in Scotland, but we definitely don't want to expose the crown jewels. But what you said, Mike, actually is really great. I mean, obviously, I worked in the pharma industry for a while, and data sharing is it's not done as much as it should be done. Clearly there is a lot of secrecy around drug development, especially when it comes to clinical trials. And it is very rare for two companies to get together to share data. But imagine if they did, and the progress that that everyone would benefit from if all the major drug companies were sharing data, especially around patients, that are maybe doing more than one clinical trial. So this is a different topic, but it's exactly what you're saying. We kind of benefit definitely from external sharing, and how do we make our data ready for external sharing? So I do work with a number of companies that are kind of going the opposite directions of each other. There's one company that I'm working with essentially has opened all their data sources up to AI. Yeah, basically, plugging on top to their sources, their ERP, their CRM, not their HR data, thankfully, but the other major sources, and are trying to benefit as much as possible by doing this. And then we have the opposite effect, where a company have decided they're only going to, just like you said, is open their data products up to AI. So we're working with a company just now who are big Snowflake users, and essentially they're building Cortex semantic models on top of all their data products, so that essentially you can use natural language on top of your data product. And that obviously is the two extremes. One is, highly governed, trusted data sources in terms of products. They're only exposed to AI. And the other is, data that actually, does anyone know what's entirely in their CRM or the ERP system, or their supply chain system, that maybe, yes, they get the golden nugget of information, but I think there's also quite a high liability that there may be a breach there. There may be data that should not be exposed, to the AI model. But it's just two examples.
Well, I have a similar example. We have a client that major U.S. university, 60-some thousand students, and we spent months with them curating their data into products, building a warehouse that consolidated several sources. And I was talking to their data architect one day, and I says, well, what if you could share this data with your student body? And he said, oh, we would never do that. We would never open our data warehouse to our student body. Well, what if you could?
Yeah.
What if you could? And I think the technologies exist now so that you can safely share your data widely and still have the protections in place. And I think data products are a huge step in the right direction there. Obviously,
Absolutely.
you have to curate and model your data into the components to be able to secure those components. You can't just throw it at the wind and and hope for the best, obviously. So in this case, students can now query data because we've governed the student data, the grades data, the academic performance, the academic activity. Those things have been governed so that if a student logs in, they only see their own activity. If an administrator logs in, they see the activity of, maybe the whole department. And if a counselor logs in, they see only the students that they have a counseling relationship with. So that can be done in a virtual type of data product object and be very effective at sharing that data. And your AI tools then, your BI tools, your ad hoc queries, your machine learning models, and your AI tools can all access that data through those same access points, through those same products.
Mike, what you're describing sounds a lot like what we were talking about before we started the webinar, when we talk about data governance being a business accelerator. And we kind of coined a term when we were preparing for this of computational governance. And I'd love to hear from you and Paul kind of how you see data governance being a business accelerator and how that sort of feeds into that notion of computational governance.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a simple answer. You know, essentially, what you want, right, or business, what businesses are after, organizations are after. They're after speed, right, and they're after good data management practices. Okay, let's not call it governance. It's wrapped up in good data management practices for me. And you know, the kind of the golden fleece, if you like, is both together. And you know, why is IT lost their value in a lot of organizations that I see today is because, you know, they have continued over the last 20 years and haven't changed their governance practices. You know, essentially, it's still tick box exercises. It's still enterprise architects and the likes in ivory tower IT that is asking, you know, the business what they're using the data, what do they want this data for, why are they using it, you know, and they give them, you know, about a 20-page you know, data classification report, you know, to fill out even before they can use data, and then they give them a security officer to make sure that they're saying exactly what they're doing, and then, you know, 3-4 weeks later they eventually get to use the data, and it's sad, but it's true that this process has not changed in a lot of organizations and IT organizations for the last 20 years, and a lot of companies, you know, are still doing it, and we need to change the way, you know, and actually on that point, I ask a lot of companies, you know, I say, so how do you, once they've filled all this in and you've approved that they can use this data, what checks have you got in place to actually decide, you know, are they doing this, what they've said, a month later, 6 months later, whatever. And actually most organizations don't have any checks. They maybe have an audit once, you know, in a while, but there is no ongoing checks in a lot of these organizations. And this is where we need to move to this computational way of doing governance, is actually helping the business, you know, to do this faster and easier. And things like data classification is a perfect example, right? Where you can automate this to classify all your data as it's coming in, all right? Instead of, you know, being asked by a security officer, what type of data are you bringing in? Oh yeah, we might have some C1, C2 level data, might be personal data. We don't actually know. Okay, so we'll just mark it at the highest, you know, level of classification. You know, you need this to be worked out computationally, where it's always assessing the data in your data products and your platform, your warehouse, your data lake, whatever, and auto classifying it. And there's some fantastic tools out there that are really doing this extremely well. Now, that's just one example. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think anybody who knows us at infoVia knows that everything we do is automation minded. So we're always thinking in terms of patterns and templates for everything we build, whether it's the acquisition of your data, whether it's the modeling of your data, whether it's the quality control of your data, if it's the access control of your data. All those things are managed with metadata, and then we apply that metadata to a template to generate code that enforces or enables each of those activities. And that accelerates the process, because not only can one developer, one BI engineer, one data engineer, one data architect be more efficient, but they're doing so in a more streamlined and consistent manner so that their peers understand what they built. Instead of us creating solutions in our silos, we're using patterns and templates to create those solutions. And then guess what we have? We have the metadata as a you know, as a result of that process. The metadata is extremely powerful, because then you can leverage it in other activities. If we know the metadata about our data model, then we can apply that metadata to our data quality through a data quality tool to monitor the quality of our data flowing into our model. If we have the metadata about our data pipeline, then we can generate documentation so our users can understand what's happening in our data pipeline. We're more transparent. If we have the metadata about our data security, as you mentioned, Paul, then we can generate views that enforce that security. And then Power BI or whatever your BI tool is doesn't have to implement security because you're doing that a layer to the left. You're pushing that left a layer. And so all of that centers around metadata and code generation for the purpose of acceleration and increasing the quality of the product that we're producing. And it's more supportable when we're done. So acceleration isn't just about doing it fast. If there's anything AI has taught me, it's a lot easier to code stuff. I can use natural language to create, a really poor problem, a really poor solution. But who's going to maintain that long term? So let's use automation in the way that we should be for deterministic and consistent results. Maybe I sounded like an infomercial there, but I'm pretty passionate about metadata-driven, pattern-based, generation of the code that enforces everything from acquisition to producing your data products out the other end.
Yeah, here.
It's interesting as you kind of covered all those areas there, Mike. What comes to mind then is there's a lot of places we could apply data governance, and so it sort of begs the question: where's the sweet spot? When is it enough data governance, and when is it too much data governance?
I'll let Paul take that one. He's got some good stories.
I mean, you ask the business, and most organizations, they'll say that it's any data governance is enough data governance. But this is going back to the question of speed, versus good data management practices. You need enough, governance there, clearly to provide the standardization, to provide these security measures, but like a security blanket, if you like. We're not like trying to penalize people. We're not trying to slow people down. We're trying to abstract the complexities of good data management practices, and security away from the business, so that the business can really focus on business value. And to me, that is enough. Is when it becomes too much, is when you're absolutely slowing the business down unnecessarily, right? Enough is protecting them, against, the complexities of data management, because, in today's world, it is very complex, that they can then focus on really providing that value. It's hard to measure, I suppose. You will probably start to understand whether you need more or whether you need, I wouldn't say less, but whether you need more computation, because that is, like you said, is the key, is to speed things up, is to essentially make sure that it's computed. Take the example of asking someone to fill in, a form to explain their architecture and their classification before they can even use data. You can easily, do this, in an automated computational way, which can speed these things up. So that's kind of, long-winded answer, but when you're starting to slow people down unnecessarily, and that is when, enough governance is that you then need to think about, actually, can we do this smarter in a better way?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. I think I would take the philosophical angle at answering it. It really comes down to the triple constraint. You can have good, fast, or cheap. Pick two. You can't have them all at the same time. So if you're going to produce results for your organization, if you're going to answer questions quickly, the questions that analytics can answer for a company or can't answer yet, how long does it take for your executives and senior managers in your organization to get answers to questions? If that number is high, then you have a problem. So let's start measuring that. And when governance drives that number down to a reasonable number of days or hours, whatever is appropriate for your organization, then you've achieved the right amount of governance. While that number is still high, you don't have the right amount yet. So then the the denominator of that equation is how many people are you employing? What is the cost of that improvement in speed? So you can have speed, accuracy, or cheap, right? Or the cost. Those are the triple constraint. So if we can drive the accuracy higher, we can drive the time to deliver down. Then how much does it cost to deliver that? If it's an army of data engineers, that's probably not practical. You probably don't have enough governance. I think with the code generation and metadata-driven approach, we can drive our data teams to less headcount. We can be more effective with less people. So the numerator is faster data production, faster time to insight. The denominator is lower cost of resources or headcount. And I think that equation is a way that we can measure the effectiveness of our data governance. Measure that, and hopefully we drive that down over time. The the value versus cost.
No, I think that's, if I could summarize what you guys are saying, is add governance as long as it's adding value. When it stops adding value, stop adding governance.
Yep. And you can't improve what you can't measure. So you have to start by measuring what's broken in your organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that kind of leads into another thought is, as we think about technology platforms, there's constantly new technology platforms coming out. It seems like Microsoft's Fabric is the latest and greatest, but we got Snowflake, Databricks, Azure, so on and so forth. How do you see a choice of technology platform playing into your data governance strategy?
I mean, it has to. I mean, governance plays a part in every component of your platform and your platform as a whole. It's not just one tool does governance. But maybe a lot of people might think that. But yeah, I mean, essentially, you need to bring in, smart choices that help you, make this easier, this journey easier. Tools for me that add value are tools that increase transparency, especially, in more of a federated approach where transparency is absolutely key. You need to see what's going on with all the teams. You need to understand what costs they're generating. You need to understand, what data flows. You need to understand, their interactions with other teams, their interactions with other data products. You need to understand domain ownership. So that transparency is absolutely key. And a lot of organizations that I see have kind of focused too much on the pipeline build, right? And they focused on, which is also extremely important. They focused on the storage, the CI/CD, the data quality, these kind of things, which are absolutely important. But also what's important is essentially the marketplace, the catalog, if you like, the front end management tool, so the domains understand, their responsibilities. They understand who is requesting access to their data products. They're understanding the contracts that they're offering to these people that really understand the data products. And there's a lot of great products out there coming onto the market now that are now really focusing on this consumer experience, if you like. Yeah, not only consumer experience, but more. For me, there's three personas. One, you've got your producer, you've got your consumer, and then you've got this kind of this steward persona, who this domain lead or domain steward, data steward, who's really, looking after the quality of the data products or the usage of them. And basically, two of these personas sit, with this kind of transparency tool, marketplace, management tool, and a lot of organizations are not really sure what to do with this. A lot of them are focusing on traditional cataloging to solve this problem. For me, traditional cataloging does not solve this problem, certainly for the business. And adoption for the business is absolutely key when it comes to, I go back to a distributed strategy, and essentially what they're doing is they're looking for trusted sources of data, as in data products. And this more of this data product management tool is now coming to the forefront. And for me, I think this will be the focus in the next year. A lot of these data product management tools, which may have been born from catalogs, or may have been born from data quality / security tools. But I think for me, the focus is really going to be that in that direction the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to answer that a little differently. Not that I'm disagreeing with Paul, but I just see the world from this start small, think big, deliver often. You got to have a goal on the horizon that you're shooting toward, but start small. I think selecting the tool first and hoping that fixes the problem, as Paul insinuated, doesn't necessarily work. I think you can start with a local SQL server as your warehouse and in SharePoint or even Excel as your governance tool to start, and then show value with that. And then you'll understand your requirements better. And then you can choose the right tool for the job. I think the database platform is the least of my concern, because we at infoVia are agnostic when it comes to database platforms. If you're building with metadata and you're generating your code, a different platform is just a different set of templates. So we can move nimbly between those, and we can start small on a local SQL server and move you to a cloud solution later when your business requirements require that level of scale or data sharing. Sometimes we move to the cloud for scale. Sometimes we move for the ability to share with our partners. But in either case, it's not the database platform that's the constraint. It's mostly your organization's willingness to participate in a process. And I think we need to make it valuable to that organization. We need to give credit to the governors, to the stewards or owners within the organization. And a lot of times IT, we want to take credit for delivering a solution. And I think we do ourselves a service if we give credit more often. Let the business have the credit for delivering a solution, even if we're setting the framework and groundwork for that. Let the business take the credit for it, and they'll be on board. They'll be our champions from that point on. They'll give us all the runway we need to implement our pet IT projects, if they're getting value and they're getting pats on the back from the results.
Yeah, Nate put a great question in the Q&A here. Let's maybe back up a little bit. And we've been talking about, the right way to do data governance. And he quotes from Bob Steiner's book on non-invasive data governance. But just the notion that everybody's doing some form of data governance. But, it kind of asks the question of why. Why should we have data governance? When should we apply data governance? And what are some good use cases for data governance?
Yeah, great question. I mean, certainly when you talk about good use cases, for governance. So as you know, we've talked about governance, stretches all the way from access control, as a way to govern, to interoperability of, products or data sets, through to, team governance or domain ownership. I mean, that is essentially a form of governance. And you can split it out into more of the technical governance of actually, what you're doing in terms of this real technical computational way. But for me, the governance really starts at the business problem what you're trying to solve, and you can then start essentially, more on the domain side, and who is responsible at the end of the day. And I'll give you an example. The biggest, it's never like an IT problem, the businesses that I work with when it comes to governance. Yeah, we can implement any computational governance that the business need, but the biggest problem is ownership. All right, and whether you're doing data mesh, data fabric, wherever, there is every organization I go into, the problem is with ownership. And who's owning what, who's owning sources, who's owning data, who's being the stewardship of this data, who's owning the data products, who's owning essentially the contracts for other people to use those data products. And this to me is absolutely what we should be focusing on when it comes to governance, because the technical part for me is actually pretty easy. Yeah. It really is about ownership and really who is the custodian essentially of these processes, yeah, and the data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good answer,
Yeah.
Paul. I heard somebody talk recently, I think it was FedEx was, but don't quote me on that. At a conference, their VP of data and analytics was saying that they make it a point of their organization to deliver the components that help their teams build pizzas. So building the data, the solutions based on that data, and he used pizza as an analogy. We want to make the ingredients really easily consumable by those who are putting them together to make the meal for our business users. And so I think that answers your question, Nate, and appreciate the question about, what are the common use cases? It's to be able to build solutions faster, not have to reinvent the wheel every time we need the definition of revenue, or what's our list of customers, or how do we measure our KPIs? Let's not reinvent that wheel every time. Let's make those products easily consumable and available, and let's put, as Paul says, the ownership in the hands of the people who know them best. Give them the tools to do their job, and let it work itself out. The technology is not the constraint here. It's the organization and their willingness to participate in that process.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to recognize that data governance casts a pretty broad shadow. It covers so many areas, from whether you want to enable that self-service analytics with a data catalog, data dictionary, whatever, but then access control we've talked about, and we've talked about data quality, retention policies, business continuity. It really flows into every aspect of your business, and it's really identifying those areas where you feel like you need to build in some resiliency to weather the storms that are inevitable in every business's journey. And so it's really identifying where you're going to be most impacted in either delivering value or going through a lean period or a disaster. I worked for an organization, and there was a freak winter storm that came through early in the winter, and it knocked out the power, and they had to switch over to their disaster recovery site. And not totally related to data, but what they discovered is when they fired up the generator, they hadn't been testing the generator, and the generator didn't work. And they had to order parts for the generator, which obviously meant business continuity didn't happen. Now, that's just one example where bringing in the right amount of governance and testing your backups, testing your ability to recover from disasters is so important in this whole realm of data governance, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our businesses keep running and they run in a resilient way. And that means putting in the right amount of controls in the right places to ensure that you're delivering value on a consistent basis rather than just process rigor, and that you're actually positioning the organization to take advantage of new business opportunities. We talked about AI. If you're not preparing your data today for what AI is going to enable tomorrow, you're going to miss the boat, or you're going to be behind your competitors in terms of being able to deliver value to your constituents. So it's really something to be thinking about broadly, but then very tactically figuring out, okay, how do we prioritize the areas where we want to implement data governance so that it actually does deliver that value and not just a lot of process rigor? Because at the end of the day, data governance does have kind of a bad rap as just bringing in a lot of bureaucratic stuff that people have to adhere to, and it creates burden rather than opportunity. So we want to change the mindset there within our organizations.
That's right, Mike. It really comes down to that ratio we talked about earlier of the time to delivery versus the cost. Driving down the numerator, driving down that ratio, and allowing your organization to get answers faster while controlling your costs. And I think data governance does achieve that. I thank Nate for bringing up Bob Siner's book, because a few weeks ago, Paul Hooper was on in a similar conversation with us. So we had the two Pauls, and I see Paul is on our attendee list today. So hi, Paul Hooper, a good friend of mine. He brought up that same book when we talked to him a few weeks ago, and that recording is available out there on YouTube as well.
Yeah. Well, I want to turn it back over to Ashley so that we can have a few minutes for questions from our attendees. If you do have any questions, just put them into the Q&A box. We'll read through those. And while people are putting their questions in there, you know, let me maybe throw one more question at our panel here. Is if we want to talk about getting to that utopia of self-service analytics, where would you suggest you start in bringing data governance in that empowers the ability to get there?
For me, that's easy. It's data products. It's treating data as a product. Full stop.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going there too. Pick your core concepts in your organization that are central to your organization and start governing those objects. Produce a data product that can be easily consumed, and then start building on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. By nature, data products, you know, are they have to meet a certain level. Now you can decide what level fits for your business, but essentially that's what's the beauty about it is you know, by nature they are standard. Yeah. And by introducing a data platform to build this in a standard way actually is even better, you know.
Because they need to be able to interoperate, don't they?
Yeah.
Building your product data product and your customer data product in two different silos doesn't allow you to report on sales appropriately. But if you build them in a common manner that allows them to interoperate, now your sales become more clear.
Oh, unless you're a data scientist, then you can do some nice fuzzy matching logic.
But we can't afford to hire data scientists to answer every business problem we have. We have to standardize, right?
Yeah, to match two customers. Yeah. We
Yeah,
haven't even
so
talked about master data. I mean, to me, that is also a big part of data
Right.
governance. Yeah, but maybe
absolutely.
it's for another
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. It's one that I didn't list in that broad shadow. We got a couple of questions from the attendees. You know, so Paul is asking, you know, how many domains is a reasonable amount to define and have dedicated teams responsible for? You know, because
Yeah.
I know Paul and I previously talked about the fact that, you know, some teams, they want to be responsible for a portion of a domain, but they don't want to be responsible for the whole domain because they don't necessarily have control over the whole domain. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, we went through this process at Roche. I think after 4 years, you know, we still didn't really know what the domains were and the subdomains were in the teams. It was, you know, going through a rebranding every couple of months. And you know, I'm working with an organization today in Switzerland, and they, you know, are going through this process of defining domains. What makes sense, you know? You know, I'm working with a trading organization. Is trading the domain, or is it, you know, energy management or back office, front office, and things like that? And to me, and this is just my opinion, is, you know, in the grand scheme of things, does it really matter? Yep. If it's a domain or a subdomain or a division or whatever. For me, the most important thing is the team, right? The team that is managing or building and managing the data products. And yes, that team will eventually find a home, whether it's in a domain or a subdomain, or whoever decides to step up and say, actually, I want to own this data product. Yep. They will eventually all be nested nice, whether it's, you know, aligned to the org structure or not. Actually, probably doesn't matter. You know, but to me, the most important thing is the team. You have a durable, stable team that is managing, you know, and producing data products. My opinion.
No, that's good. That's good. Travis has a good question here as well. You know, as someone that's starting this journey of trying to, as he put it, raise an army of citizen data analysts, how do you get that process started of improving organization-wide data literacy, and then creating easily usable components for those citizen analysts? How do you start bridging those gaps?
Mike, I'll let you go. I mean, we've only got 4 minutes. Data literacy in an organization, that could take hours to
Well,
to talk about.
okay, I'll sum it up, and it's a little bit self-serving, but infoVia, we provide services. We've been there before. We've built these for our clients. So bring somebody along who's done it before. Don't learn all the hard lessons yourself, and we're happy to help with that.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that. And again, it may sound like a shameless plug, but one of the things we find with the majority of our clients is they've been given a mandate, similar to what Travis is describing here. They've been given a mandate to execute on the vision of the higher ups, but they're feeling a little bit out of their depth. They're feeling like a bit of a fish out of the water and trying to figure out, how do I get this right? How do I get it right the first time? And a lot of times just bringing in someone that has been around the block a couple of times is really the solution to that, because having a good partner with you helps to ensure success. And now, not every partner is created equal. You got to find someone that knows what they're doing, and they're not in this fake it till they make it kind of mindset. But if you do that, you have a much higher likelihood of success. And aside from that, it's really educating yourself around some of these practices and getting tapped into the industry, learning about what tools are out there that are being successful. There are way too many offerings in this self-service analytics arena, in my opinion. And it's hard to decide which one should I invest in. And, when I looked at this at the Gartner conference a couple of years ago, one of the questions I would ask a lot of these vendors is sort of, what's the entry point for a mid-sized organization? And they all had 6-figure answers. And so when you're talking about making that kind of an investment, you want to make sure you get it right. The last thing you want to do is throw $100,000 at a solution that falls flat. And then you have to figure out, how are you going to recover from that as an organization? So definitely bringing in a partner is a valuable resource when you're starting a journey that you haven't gone on before. One last question here from Nate. He lists some of his favorite books, but what would you say are some of maybe your favorite books or resources on data governance that have impacted your view of how to approach it?
It's slightly out the box. This one for me, it's not so much about the governance, but actually the team topologies by Manuel Baez. Is actually, for me, it focuses on how to organize your teams. Yep. And that is, for me, also a way of governance. Yep. It's around about team topologies, around about interactions with other teams. That's a great read. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
I tend to be jaded towards the modeling and engineering side. I answered the question with a few of my favorite authors in that regard. Hat tip to obviously Bill Inman, but Dan Lindstead. We do a lot of Data Vault practitioner work. It's that metadata driven code generation pattern based approach at data modeling. So Dan Lindstead's writings, and then Joe Reese recently released a data engineering book, and then there's the old fashioned data modelers, the Len Silverstons and Steve Hobermans and that group. So anything from them help you with that modeling and engineering approach.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Appreciate that. Well, I think that brings us to the top of the hour here, and appreciate everybody that attended today. Certainly, infoVia can help out with your data governance journey and strategy. If that's something that you're getting ready to embark on, we'd be happy to help you out. Our contact info, I think, is on the next slide here. And so feel free to reach out, and someone will get back to you. Ashley, Mike, Paul, anything else we want to mention in closing?
No, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you for this wonderful, robust conversation. We will be sharing the recording. I'm also going to be putting in chat a feedback survey on today's webinar. We would love to get your thoughts and also, what topics are top of mind going into 2025 that maybe we can cover in future webinars. So if you wouldn't mind taking time to fill out that survey, it'll just take a couple minutes. We would really value your feedback there. With that, I want to thank Mike and Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
From
Late
pleasure.
in the day
My
for
pleasure.
you over there in Europe, so appreciate you coming on and visiting with us today.
8 o'clock. No, not a problem. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you.
wonderful holiday season
Yeah.
and all the best in 2025.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Merry
everyone.
Christmas.
Bye-bye.